The candles in the Great Hall of Whitehall have been burning since before dawn, and by the time you arrive, dressed in your finest, heart already moving faster than you would like, the air is thick with beeswax, dried lavender. The air is thick with beeswax, and something underneath it all that you cannot quite name, something animal. Something watchful. The musicians in the corner are playing a pavane, slow and stately, and the sound fills the vaulted ceiling like smoke curling upward into the gilded dark above you. Everyone is smiling. You should smile too. This is the court of Henry VIII, in the year of someone's grace and someone else's ruin, and you have just walked into the most dangerous room in England. Go ahead and settle back. Let your shoulders drop, because this story is going to ask something of you, and you will want to be comfortable when it does. The palace itself is enormous in ways that feel almost deliberate. Corridor after corridor of painted ceilings and cold stone floors, covered in expensive rushes, rooms that open into other rooms, each one watched over by someone whose job it is to watch. There are over 1,000 people employed here, servants who dress other servants, guards who guard other guards, and somewhere at the center of it all, like a sun that burns rather than warms, is the king. You do not see him yet. You feel him the way you feel weather, in the behavior of everyone around you, in the angle of their attention, in the careful way they position their bodies, so that if he enters, they are already facing the right direction. This is a skill you will need to learn quickly. Everything here is a skill you will need to learn quickly. Thomas, a young man of 23 who arrived at court 8 months ago from a minor family in Kent, is standing near the window. He came with letters of introduction, moderate Latin, and an excellent memory for names. He has survived this long by being pleasant and forgettable, which at the court of Henry VIII is perhaps the greatest talent a person can possess. He watches you from the corner of his eye as you enter, and he thinks, another one, not unkindly, only with the specific sadness of someone who has already learned what you have not. The roses are real, by the way. They are arranged in enormous urns throughout the hall, deep red and creamy white, and they are replaced every 3 days so that they never wilt where anyone important might see them. Nothing here is allowed to show its age. Nothing here is allowed to decay visibly. The court of Henry VIII is the most glamorous institution in the world, and also the most pitiless. And the remarkable thing, the thing that will take your breath away before the week is out, is how long it takes to understand that both of those things are exactly the same thing. And somewhere beneath the perfume and the music, a door you didn't notice has already closed behind you. There is a man near the eastern corridor whose name is Edmund, and he has been practicing his bow since the age of 7, not because his father was cruel, or because his tutors were unusually strict, but because his father loved him, and loving a son in Tudor England meant teaching him, early and without sentiment, that the body is a political instrument, the angle of a spine, the depth of a bend, the precise moment to rise and the precise moment to hold, just a breath longer than feels natural, to show that you understand your place in the order of things. Edmund can execute a perfect court bow in the dark, half asleep, on a moving boat, and still, on certain mornings, he wakes with his heart already loud in his chest, rehearsing it again. You will learn this too, if you survive long enough. The rules of deference at the court of Henry VIII are not written down anywhere in a single document you could study. They exist the way certain languages exist, passed between bodies, absorbed through proximity, corrected not with words, but with silence, with the slight cooling of a room when someone has erred. You will not be told when you have made a mistake. You will simply feel the temperature change, and you will spend the rest of the day trying to remember what you did, and when, and in front of whom. Pull the blanket a little closer, because this part of the story requires you to feel something uncomfortable, and it is better to feel it warm. The hierarchy moves outward from the king like rings in water, and every single ring knows exactly where it stands in relation to every other. The gentlemen of the privy chamber outrank the grooms outrank the pages. The pages outrank you, probably, and they are 14 years old and already exhausted by the performance of it. Everyone bows to everyone above them, of everyone, above to everyone above them, and everyone above them watches to see if it is done correctly. Because how a man bows tells you everything about how clearly he sees himself, and a man who sees himself too clearly, too highly, too independently is a man who has already begun to make an enemy of the one person he cannot afford to. There is a story, passed in whispers among the lower corridors, about a courtier, no one will say his name now, who rose from his bow a half-second too soon in the presence of someone close to the king. It was not the bow itself that ruined him. It was what the rising suggested, that he was in a hurry, that he had somewhere else to be, that he considered this moment, this room, this proximity to power as something to move through rather than something to inhabit with his entire, grateful, obedient self. He was gone within the month, his rooms reassigned before his things had fully cooled. You stand in the corridor now, and you watch Edmund, and you think you understand. But understanding and knowing are two very different countries. And you are still standing at the border of one, squinting at the other, believing the distance is smaller than it is, because the man watching you from across the room has already decided whether he likes you. He simply hasn't told you yet. There is a particular quality to the silence that falls over a court when someone has fallen. It is not the silence of absence. The man's chair is still there, his usual place at the long table still faintly warm in the memory of the room. It is the silence of adjustment, of 100 people quietly, efficiently, surgically removing a name from their internal map of who matters. The way you might fold a corner of a page without thinking, out of habit, out of self-preservation, out of the simple animal understanding that what happened to him is a thing that happens, and that proximity to the fallen is its own form of falling. His name was Richard. He had a laugh that arrived before he did, filling a corridor several seconds before his body rounded the corner, and people genuinely enjoyed hearing it. That is the part worth remembering. He was not merely tolerated, he was liked. He told excellent stories about a pilgrimage he had never actually completed, and he remembered the names of people's children, and he brought small gifts back from travel. A carved wooden toy, a piece of Flemish lace, not to impress anyone but simply because he had thought of them while he was away. He had been at court for 11 years. He knew where everything was. He knew everyone's particular sensitivities, their private embarrassments, the exact pitch of flattery each person required to open like a flower in morning light. Settle in, let your eyes grow soft, because this is the part of the story that asks you to hold something heavy without being crushed by it. He had dined with the king 3 weeks ago. They had laughed together. Genuinely laughed, the kind that makes a man forget. Briefly, the architecture of the room he is in. Someone who was present said afterward that the king had clapped Richard on the shoulder in the way he sometimes did with men he truly favoured, and Richard had walked home through the torchlit corridor, feeling, for perhaps the first time in years, entirely safe. This is the most dangerous feeling a person can have at the court of Henry VIII. What happened next is difficult to reconstruct precisely, because the people who know are not speaking, and the people who are speaking do not know. A letter, perhaps, a friendship with someone whose star had already begun to dim without Richard noticing. A single sentence reported back out of context, stripped of its tone, its humour, its obvious innocence, and placed into the ear of someone who had reasons of their own to place it somewhere damaging. History does not always deal in dramatic betrayals. Sometimes it deals in the quiet, almost bureaucratic accumulation of small misfortunes until the weight of them tips something that cannot be righted. By Thursday, his name was spoken differently. By Friday, it was barely spoken at all. Thomas, the young man from Kent you met in the first corridor, watched all of this from a careful distance and felt something cold move through him that had no name in any language he had been taught. He filed it away. He adjusted. He smiled at dinner and said very little, which was the right choice, and hated himself for knowing it was the right choice, which was the human part he could not yet afford. And the tragedy is not that it happened. The tragedy is that everyone saw it coming, and no one said a word. Her hands are folded in her lap the way they have been folded every morning for the past 3 years. Ours arranged with the particular deliberateness of someone who learned early that stillness is a form of armor. The rings on her fingers catch the light from the tall window, cold winter light, the kind that illuminates without warming, and she watches it move across the stone floor in a slow, indifferent rectangle while the ladies around her murmur about fabric and the price of imported silk, and whether the new French ambassador is as handsome as the last one. She listens. She smiles at the appropriate moments. She offers one gentle observation that makes everyone laugh softly, and then she returns to her window and her rectangle of light and the thing she is not thinking about. She has learned not to think about it directly. You approach certain feelings at the court of Henry VIII the way you approach a fire in a closed room, sideways, carefully, never letting it know you are looking at it. Let your breathing slow. Let the room around you go quiet. Because what this chapter asks of you is not attention. It is the particular tenderness we reserve for people who are never given permission to need anything. Her name today is Jane, though it has been Catherine and will one day be another Catherine, and in between there has been an Anne whose story moves so fast and ends so completely that the court has nearly convinced itself she was a dream. The name changes, the chair does not. The chair is always there, beside the king, slightly lower, angled just enough to suggest deference, without quite demanding it, and the woman in it is always performing the same essential role, to be pleasant, to be fertile if God is willing, to be decorative in the precise way a room is decorative, present and beautiful, and never so interesting that attention lingers uncomfortably long. Jane has a sister she misses with a physical ache she locates somewhere beneath her sternum, like a bruise that never fully fades. Her sister lives 3 days' ride away in a house with a garden that grows lavender and rosemary along a low stone wall, and sometimes in the early morning, before the ladies arrive and the performance of the day begins, Jane closes her eyes and stands in that garden for exactly as long as she dares. She can smell it. She is quite certain she can smell it. She is not unhappy, exactly. This is the complicated truth that history tends to flatten. She was not dragged here against her will. Not entirely, and there are moments, genuine ones, when the life she inhabits fills with something that resembles joy. The king can be tender. He can be funny, unexpectedly, privately, in the moments between the moments the court is watching. She has seen him gentle with a hound. She has seen him moved by music in a way that briefly made him look like someone's son rather than everyone's sovereign. But gentleness here is not a promise. It is a weather pattern, and she has learned, the way all of them learn, that the most dangerous thing a woman in this palace can do is to let her face show the distance between what she feels and what she is permitted to feel, because that distance, visible, becomes a story. And stories here have a way of arriving at the king's ear wearing clothes they did not leave home in. She arranges her face into something pleasant, and no one in the room wondered what it cost her. There is a game they play at court that has no name and no board, and no pieces you can hold in your hand, and yet every single person inside these walls is playing it, every waking hour, including the hours they spend pretending they are not. The rules are simple enough to understand and impossible enough to master that men have spent entire careers, entire lives studying them and still lost everything on a Tuesday afternoon for reasons they never fully understood. The first rule is that alliance is not friendship. The second rule is that friendship is not safety. The third rule, the one that takes the longest to learn because it requires you to think poorly of yourself, is that you are playing too. You have always been playing. You began playing the moment you walked through the gate, and the only way to stop is to leave, and leaving requires permission, and permission requires favor, and favor requires the game. Thomas understands this now in a way he did not 8 months ago when he arrived with his letters and his moderate Latin and his excellent memory for names. Let your body settle deeper into wherever you are. Let the edges of the room around you soften, because this chapter is about loneliness, the specific architectural loneliness, of a person surrounded by hundreds of people who need something from them. His closest companion at court is a man named William, who is funny and generous with his wine, and who once sat with Thomas through an entire feverish night when Thomas was ill and no one else came. Thomas has not forgotten this. He will not forget it. And yet, and this is the thing he turns over in the dark of his room, like a stone he cannot put down. He does not know, cannot know whether William sat with him out of genuine affection or out of the calculation that a man who survives a fever owes something to the man who witnessed his survival. Both things can be true simultaneously. This is the particular cruelty of the court. Kindness and strategy wear each other's faces so completely that after a while you cannot tell them apart, and the attempting to tell them apart begins to corrode something essential in you, some basic willingness to believe that a warm gesture is simply a warm gesture and nothing more. William, for his part, is entirely aware that Thomas watches him with this careful, sly, but byly sorrowful attention. He finds it quietly a relief. It means Thomas is learning. A man who trusts completely here is a man who will be used by everyone and protected by no one. And William genuinely does not want that for Thomas, who reminds him, faintly, of a younger brother he lost to sweating sickness 6 years ago in a village that has nothing to do with palaces or kings or the exhausting mathematics of survival. So the affection is real, and the strategy is real, and they sit together at dinner and laugh at the same things and pass information to each other with the casual ease of men who have decided, without ever saying so, that they are safer together than apart, which is the closest thing to friendship this particular world permits. Outside in the corridor, someone is whispering. It is always possible that the whispering is about nothing. It is always possible that it is about you. The not knowing is not incidental to the experience of court life. The not knowing is the experience of court life, administered daily in small, untraceable doses, until uncertainty becomes the weather you live inside so completely that you forget there was ever a time when the sky was simply the sky. The man who dined at your table tonight may be the man who whispers against you tomorrow, and the worst part is, you would do the same. You hear him before you see him, not his voice, not yet. You hear the room change. It is the most precise way to describe it, and also the most difficult to explain to someone who has not felt it. The way a space of 200 people shifts in a single unified breath when a particular door opens, the way conversation does not stop so much as it is instinctively redirected. Every face reorienting the way flowers turn toward light, except that this light is dangerous, and everyone knows it, and they turn toward it anyway, because turning away is the one thing none of them can afford. The musicians adjust their tempo almost imperceptibly. A servant near the window moves 3 steps to the left for no reason he could articulate if asked. Thomas straightens without deciding to straighten. His body knows things his mind is still catching up to. And then there he is. Take one slow breath. Let it out completely. Because whatever you have imagined about this moment, the reality of it is something that lives in the body rather than the mind, and your body needs to be open to receive it. He is larger than you expected, not simply in height, though he is tall, but in the particular density of his presence, the way he occupies space with an absolute confidence that was never learned because it never needed to be. He was born to this room. He was born to every room. He moves through the gathered court the way weather moves through a landscape, unhurried, inevitable, reshaping everything it touches without appearing to try. He is wearing deep crimson today. He is wearing deep crimson today, heavy with embroidery, and the jewels at his collar catch the candlelight and scatter it in small cold fires across the faces of the people nearest him. And those people smile reflexively, as though the light itself is a gift they have been given. He is 53 years old, and his body carries the complicated story of a man who was once described as the most beautiful prince in Christendom, and who has since been remade by time and injury and appetite into something altogether different, not diminished, exactly, but transformed the way a river is transformed when it widens, becoming slower and deeper, and considerably more dangerous than it was in its swift, narrow youth. His leg troubles him. You can see it in the way he moves, the slight redistribution of weight, the almost invisible wince he has perfected into invisibility through sheer will. No one looks at his leg. No one would dream of looking at his leg. His eyes, though, his eyes are the thing no portrait fully captures. They are small and pale, and extraordinarily alert, moving across the room with the steady and moving across the room, unhurried attention of a man who has spent decades reading people the way other men read documents, quickly, accurately, and with a complete understanding that what is written on the surface is rarely the whole of what is there. He has ruined men based on a flicker. He has pardoned men based on a tone of voice. He contains within him a terrifying combination of genuine intelligence and absolute power, and the deep, specific loneliness of someone who has never in his life been spoken to with complete honesty, and who knows it and who cannot decide whether he is grateful or bereft. He pauses near a cluster of courtiers and says something low that makes them laugh, and the laughter is genuine. This is the thing that undoes you slightly, that the laughter is genuine, that he can still do this. That underneath the machinery of terror, there is a man who is sometimes simply, recognizably, a person in a room trying to make people he likes feel at ease. And then his eyes find you, just for a moment, just long enough, and the whole court seem to exhale. It begins, as most catastrophes at the court of Henry VIII begin, with something extraordinarily small. A sentence, perhaps, or not even a sentence, a fragment of one, 3 or 4 words lifted from the middle of a longer thought the way you might lift a single thread from a piece of cloth, pulling it free of its context, its color, its meaning, until what remains in your hand bears no resemblance to the garment it came from. Someone heard something, someone repeated it to someone who repeated it to someone else, and in the repeating it was adjusted. Not necessarily with malice. This is the important thing to you. Understand, the thing that makes it so much harder to be angry about. Not necessarily with malice, but with the inevitable imprecision of human memory and human need. Because everyone who carries a story adds something of themselves to it. Their own fears, their own desires, their own quiet calculations about what version of events serves them best in this particular room on this particular afternoon. By the time it reaches the 3rd person, it is already a different story. By the time it reaches the 5th, it has a shape and a weight that the original words never possessed. Let your eyes grow soft. Let the ceiling above you become distant and gentle. Because this chapter is not really about rumour, it is about the particular helplessness of watching your own name become something you no longer recognise. The rumour about Thomas, and it was always going to be Thomas. You understood this somewhere around chapter 3, didn't you? You felt it coming the way you feel rain before the first drop falls. The rumour about Thomas begins on a Wednesday morning in a room he was not in, spoken by a man whose name he will never learn, concerning a conversation Thomas had 10 days ago that was innocent and unmemorable, and which Thomas himself has nearly forgotten. He had said something about the king's new policy on grain taxation. He had said it carefully. He had said it in the measured, non-committal way he had spent 8 months perfecting, but he had said it to William privately, in the easy shorthand of men who trust each other, and somewhere in that ease he had allowed one word, one single, unguarded word, to carry just enough of what he actually thought that, extracted and delivered without its surroundings, it could be made to sound like something else entirely. He does not know yet. This is the thing that history does to people. It moves faster than they do. He is in Set garden at this moment, actually, standing in the thin cold sunlight of a February morning, watching a robin work at the frozen ground with a patience that strikes him as almost instructive. He is thinking about a letter he wants to write to his mother. He is thinking about whether the boots he ordered from the cordwainer will be ready by Friday. He is thinking about ordinary human thoughts, and his face in this moment is entirely open, unguarded, the face he was born with rather than the one he has constructed for survival. And it is a kind face, a genuinely kind face, the face of someone who remembers the names of people's children and means it. Inside, 3 corridors away, his name is being spoken in a tone that will cost him something. He does not yet know how much. That knowledge is coming toward him across the cold stone floors of Whitehall with the slow, inexorable patience of water finding a crack, unhurried, inevitable, and utterly indifferent to the robin and the boots, and the letter to his mother that he will never quite find the right moment to write. Surviving a rumour at the court of Henry VIII requires one thing above all others, and it is not innocence, because innocence is irrelevant here, and it is not evidence, because evidence can be reframed, and it is not even the right friends, though the right friends help. It requires speed. The ability to know before you know, to sense the shift in temperature before the cold fully arrives, to begin your defense before you have been accused of anything, which means defending yourself against a charge that does not yet officially exist, which means admitting implicitly that you knew there was something to defend against, which can itself become part of the story. There is no clean exit from this corridor. There is only the choosing of which wall to press yourself against, and hoping with everything you have that the door opens before the ceiling comes down. By the time you heard your own name spoken in that tone, the version of you that mattered was already gone. The fire in his room has been burning since before first light. The fire in his room has been burning since before first light, and the wood is good wood, dry and generous, the kind that burns with a low, steady warmth, rather than a dramatic crackling. And Thomas lies beneath his blanket for a moment longer than necessary, watching the light it throws move softly across the plastered ceiling above him in slow, shapeless patterns that remind him, in a way he cannot quite trace back to its origin, of the ceiling of the room he slept in, as a boy in Kent, where the shadows moved differently, because the trees outside were different trees, and the window faced a different direction, and the world was a different size entirely. He does not know that this is the last ordinary morning. That is the nature of last ordinary mornings. They do not announce themselves. They arrive wearing the same clothes as every other morning, carrying the same sounds, the distant movement of servants in the corridor, the particular creak of the floorboard nearest the door, the smell of wood smoke, and the faint, cold edge of February air finding its way through the gap in the shutter he has been meaning to have fixed for 3 weeks now, and has not fixed because 3 weeks ago it did not seem urgent, and this morning it still does not seem urgent because this morning everything is exactly as it always is. Let your breathing go slow and even. Let the warmth of wherever you are hold you completely, because this is the chapter that requires the most of you, not your attention, but your heart, open and undefended, the way hearts are just before sleep. He rises. He washes his face in water that is cold enough to make him inhale sharply through his teeth, and the sharpness of it is clarifying in the way the cold water always is, immediate and honest, and he looks at himself briefly in the small steel mirror on the table and sees nothing remarkable, a face that is neither young nor old, a face that is neither young nor old, eyes that are tired in the way all eyes at court are tired, a jaw that needs attention from the barber he will visit Thursday. He looks ordinary to himself. He has no way of knowing that ordinary is precisely what he will not be permitted to remain. He dresses with care, for rustic, but because dressing with care is a discipline he has maintained since his first week here, and he is superstitious about it in the way that people become superstitious about small rituals when the larger architecture of their life feels unstable. If I do this correctly, if I fold this carefully, if I tie this the way I always tie it, then the day will hold its shape. He ties his points. He smooths his doublet. He thinks briefly and warmly about a conversation he had with William last evening that made him laugh in a way he had not laughed in several weeks. A real laugh unperformed, the kind that leaves a faint residual warmth in the chest the following morning like the last of a good fire. He is not happy exactly, but he is something adjacent to it, something that in a different life, a smaller life, a life conducted further from the centre of things, might have been allowed to grow into happiness given sufficient time and sufficient quiet. He has felt these past few days a cautious loosening. The rumour, and he knows there is a rumour. He has felt the temperature of it, without yet knowing its precise shape, seems to have stilled. William told him last night that certain names had been mentioned in certain rooms, and the mentions had not landed with the weight that dangerous mentions land with, and Thomas had exhaled something he had been holding for 11 days, and had slept afterward better than he had slept in weeks. Outside his window, the city is waking in its gradual, unhurried way. The distant sound of a cart on cobblestones, a voice calling something across a courtyard, a bell from a church whose name he has never learned counting out the hour with a patience that suggests it has been counting out hours since long before Thomas arrived in London, and will continue counting them long after he has ceased to be anyone's concern. He pulls on his gloves the same way he always did and thought about nothing in particular, which was the last peaceful thought he ever had. The Thames in February has a particular colour that no painter has ever quite captured to anyone's satisfaction, a grey that is not simply grey but contains within it every other colour in a state of suspension, brown and green and a cold, distant blue, that appears only in the deepest part of the current where the water moves fastest and thinks least about the things it is carrying. The boatmen know this river the way they know their own hands, its moods, its silences, its particular angers in certain weathers, and they do not look at it sentimentally because they cannot afford to, but sometimes, in the early morning before the passengers arrive, and the day becomes a transaction, they look at it the way you look at something you have lived beside so long that love and familiarity have become the same feeling, indistinguishable, comfortable and slightly sad. Thomas is in a boat. He is sitting very still. This is not a journey he chose. This is the other kind of journey, the kind that arrives at your door before you have finished dressing, announced by men whose faces carry the specific blankness of people performing a function they have performed before and will perform again, and have learned to perform without allowing it to mean anything, because the alternative is that it means everything, and that is not a sustainable way to escort a man to a boat on a cold February morning. Let the room around you go very quiet. Let whatever you are holding in your hands rest, because this chapter asks nothing of you except your presence, simply to be here beside the river, beside Thomas, for a little while longer. He was given time to gather a few things. This was a mercy, and he recognized it as one which is its own particular kind of sorrow, that you can still recognize mercy, that the capacity for gratitude has not yet been extinguished, that some part of you is still performing the courtly calculations of who has been kind and who has not, even as the boat pulls away from the stairs and the city begins its slow rearrangement around your absence. He took the letters from his mother. He took a small book of prayers, not because he is especially devout, but because his mother gave it to him when he left for London, and it smells, still faintly, of the lavender she pressed between its pages, and lavender is the smell of the garden with the low stone wall 3 days' ride away, that he will not now be visiting in spring the way he had, in the loose, unexamined way of people who believe in their own future, been quietly assuming he would. William was not at the door when they came. Thomas does not know what to make of this. He has been turning it over since the boat pushed off from the stairs, holding it carefully, the way you hold something that might be nothing and might be everything, not yet ready to look at it directly. Perhaps William did not know. Perhaps William knew too late. Perhaps William knew exactly when he needed to know, and made a calculation that Thomas, in the same position, cannot say with certainty he would not have made himself. This is the thought he keeps returning to, and it is in some ways the most difficult one, not the anger, which would be clean, but the a standing which is not clean at all. The tower appears around the bend in the river, the way it always appears, gradually and then all at once, its stone the same cold grey as the water, its mass so complete and so indifferent that it seems less like a building than like a fact, something the landscape simply contains the way it contains the river and the sky and the bare February trees along the bank, standing with their arms open, in a posture that could be surrender or could be welcome, and is, from this distance, impossible to tell which. There are other men who have made this journey. There are women who have made it, sitting in boats not unlike this one, watching this same stone approach, across this same grey water, carrying things they did not want to put down. Some of them survived it, some of them did not. History keeps a ledger of which is which, and the ledger is accurate as far as it goes, but it does not record what any of them saw when they looked at the water, or what they thought about, or whether they found, in the last ordinary minutes before the boat touched the stairs beneath the gate, something that resembled peace, or something that only resembled peace because everything else had already been taken. The river that carried so many toward that grey stone entrance asked no questions and offered no comfort. Edmund is an old man now. He is sitting in a chair beside a fire in a house in Gloucestershire that belongs to him entirely, that no one can take from him, that has a garden visible through the low window where something, rosemary he thinks, or perhaps lavender, it is difficult to tell from here in winter, grows along a stone wall with the patient, unhurried persistence of things that do not know they are supposed to have stopped by now. He has been sitting in this chair for a portion of every evening for 11 years, since the day he left Lon. Don with his health mostly intact and his name mostly clean and a letter of release from a situation that had been, for the final 3 years of his time at court, quietly and consistently terrifying in ways he has never described to anyone in this house, because there is no language for it that does not require the listener to have been there. And no one in this house has been there, and he is grateful for this every single morning when he wakes in a room where the only thing watching him is the window. Let your breathing go slow and deep. Let the fire beside you, real or imagined, warm the parts of you that this story has made thoughtful. Because this is the last chapter, and it belongs not to the dead, but to the ones who carried everything forward into lives the court could not follow them into. He survived by becoming, over the course of 2 decades, a person he is not entirely certain he recognizes. This is the thing about survival in a dangerous place that the histories tend to skip past in their eagerness to reach the executions and the marriages and the theological ruptures. Survival has a cost that is paid not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow, cumulative expenditure of small pieces of yourself, offered up daily in the currency of silence and complicity, and the choosing, again and again, of your own continuation over the harder, cleaner thing that some younger version of you might have chosen instead. He said nothing when Richard fell. He said nothing when others fell after Richard. He smiled at dinners and passed information with the careful generosity of a man investing in his own protection, and told himself, in the dark of various rooms in various years, that this was simply how the world worked, that everyone was doing it, that the alternative was Thomas and the boat and the grey water and the gate. And he was not wrong about any of this, which is precisely what makes it so difficult to put down even now, 11 years later, in a chair beside a fire in Gloucestershire, with rosemary or possibly lavender growing quietly along the wall outside. Edmund received a letter from him last autumn, written in the same fluid, elegant hand that has not changed in 30 years, full of the kind of news that can be written in a letter without risk. A nephew's marriage, the price of wool, a description of an unusually warm October. They have not spoken honestly with each other since before Thomas. This is not something either of them has acknowledged in writing. It is simply a space that exists between them now, a room neither of them enters, furnished with things neither of them wishes to look at directly. The friendship is real, the space is also real. Both things persist side by side, the way things do when the people involved are old enough to understand that the imperfect version of something is frequently the only version available, and that, choosing it over nothing, is not weakness but a kind of hard-won, unsentimental love. Thomas did not die. This is worth saying plainly, because the story has been moving toward that particular darkness long enough that you deserve to know the light is real. He was held for 4 months, questioned with the specific, unhurried patience of men who already know the answers they want and are simply waiting for the words to arrive in the right order, and then released into a diminished version of his former life. No court, no proximity to power, a small income and a smaller reputation, and a house in the country where he lived quietly for many years, and kept a garden and wrote letters to his mother until she died, and then wrote them anyway to no one, because the habit of reaching toward her was stronger than the fact of her absence. He was not happy, exact lie, but there was the garden. There was the particular blue of certain summer mornings, seen from a window that faced the right direction. There were neighbours whose children he knew by name, and a dog of no distinguished breed who slept at the foot of his bed with the absolute uncomplicated loyalty that only dogs and very young children are capable of sustaining indefinitely. There were evenings that arrived softly and did not ask anything of him, and this, the evening that asks nothing, the room that requires no performance, the face that can simply be the face you were born with. This, it turned out, was not nothing. This was, in fact, quite a lot. This was, perhaps, everything. The court of Henry VIII glittered for another decade after Thomas left it, and then the king died on a January morning in a room full of people who had survived him, and the world rearranged itself the way worlds do after the removal of something enormous, slowly and then all at once, and the men and women who had spent their lives navigating that particular current found themselves suddenly in still water, blinking, their bodies still braced for a wave that was no longer coming. Some of them did not know how to live in the stillness. Some of them never learned. They spent the remainder of their years moving through quieter rooms with the careful look-after rooms with the careful, watchful energy of people who have been somewhere that changes you permanently, who carry the map of a dangerous country in their bodies long after they have left its borders, flinching at doors, reading faces, sleeping lightly, waking in the dark to the echo of a question no one is asking anymore. Edmund watches the fire. The rosemary, he is fairly certain now that it is rosemary. He is fairly certain now that it is rosemary, moves slightly in a wind he cannot feel from here. Somewhere in the house a door closes softly, and he listens to the silence that follows it, and the silence is only silence, which is the most extraordinary luxury he has ever known. They lived long lives, some of them, and spent every remaining year of those years learning how to forget the things that kept them alive.